More to come. Plus,
I'm going to be making a very big announcement on Tuesday, November 15th at Mar-a-Lago.
the United States heads to the polls in the midterms as the spectre of a former president looms large.
Call 0345 60 60 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Tom Swarbrick on LBC.
Very good afternoon to you. On the M25 again this morning.
Why does it take young people like me up on a f***ing gantry on the M25 for you to listen?
I love your trying to work. No, you can't do it. That's assault. That is assault. That is assault. You might call that assault, but what do you call it if they're holding up ambulances?
I've got no sympathies with them protesters at all.
6-year-old grandson will come home from school asking me, are we going to die, Grandpa?
Runaway climate change, the collapse of human civilization and the loss of everything we love. And I can't stand by and let it happen.
Make the lives of the politicians, the people who they're accusing of murdering people and can actually make a change in this country, make their lives a living hell.
I think many people disagree with their points, but the way in which they're going about is completely ostracising nearly everyone.
And the quality and experience and knowledge of all those people who are telling us that we're heading for climate hell. Why wouldn't you be in despair?
Just Stop Oil at it again as world leaders emit the equivalent of 10,000 homes worth of carbon to go to COP27 in Egypt. The campaign group wants a number of things. First, the government stops all new oil and gas licences. Around 100 are being offered. How likely that is, I'm not so sure. The second thing they want is attention, and they've definitely got that. For the next hour, if you've been caught up in the protests, if you've been frustrated by them, if you agree with them, if you have a question about just how apparently hopeless our collective future really is, then you can put your call to Just Stop Oil this afternoon. 0345 6060 973, the number, 84850 to text. You can tweet this afternoon at LBC. I'm very pleased to say that Graham Buss, a spokesperson for Just Stop Oil, joins us this afternoon until 5. Thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme. It's good to see you. Let's come to your main substantive aim before we get to the protests themselves. How much progress have you made via these protests and others before in stopping new oil and gas licences?
I think you need to look slightly longer term here. The non-violent civil resistance works. There's a long history of non-violent civil resistance works. And I think we will win in the end.
What gives you that confidence?
Non-violent civil resistance has a long history of succeeding. Just outside the Houses of Parliament, there's a statue to the suffragettes. They engaged in non-violent civil resistance.
So because the suffragettes made it work, you will continue to go until you get what you want?
There's more than just the suffragettes. There's a long history of it. I mean, look at the gay rights movement in the 1960s. There were lots and lots of cases of non-violent civil resistance working. And we might fail. It is possible we might fail. But currently, as Antonio Guterres said, we are on the road to climate hell. So that's why we're taking this action. And I hope we don't.
The main method by which you're going to get what you want or make what you want happen is through these protests. That's how you see governments bending to what you're asking them to do.
There are many methods by which you interact with governments. Most of those we've tried, I would say all of them have been tried so far. You talk to people who are involved in the environmental crisis over the last, 30, 40, 50 years. All those methods have been tried. Writing to MPs, voting, getting into Parliament, all those methods have been tried. We have failed. We are now at the position where this is our last best hope.
And yet no country in the G20 is decarbonising faster than Britain.
Tom, what you have to understand is that we are not decarbonising fast enough.
I'm very happy to hear that argument, Graham. I am, and we'll get into the details of it. But it is a fact, isn't it, that no G20 country has been decarbonising faster than Britain?
That's not the relevant point, is it? We may be at the front of the pack, but the the climate crisis is way in front and it's running away from us.
Let me put this to you. Paul asks this question. The UK agency that awards oil and gas licences is called the North Sea Transition Authority. They've got offices in London and Aberdeen. How many meetings have Just Stop Oil had with the NSTA to discuss the new licensing round?
I used to work for Shell. I worked for Shell for 33 years. I was a principal scientist. If I wanted to talk to them, I could talk to them. If I wanted to go and talk to government, I could talk to government. Climate protesters are excluded from the discussion, and when we do talk to people, we are ignored. There is no point in engaging with the Oil and Gas Agency. What you engage with, the people who need to act are our government. They issue the licenses. They issue the consents. They know that this should stop. By issuing new oil and gas licenses, they've got 100 plus 100 going on at the moment. By issuing those licenses and consents, they are ensuring that people will die.
But you haven't asked for or sought a meeting with the agency that awards those oil and gas licenses?
No.
Right. You say that there is only 8 years' worth of North Sea oil and gas left. After that point, once you get what you want and have those licenses removed, what are you suggesting is used in manufacturing nearly every product on Earth?
So this is a very good question. And I think what you need to look at this in some detail. The vast majority of our oil and gas is used in areas for which we can make changes. There are a small number in which we, at this moment, don't have a solution. One of them is in the chemical industry. And I know this because, of course, I come from this area. Now, if we husband our resources, we can make that last a lot longer. But ultimately, if we don't have a solution, for a technical solution, we have to use less of it. That's simply the case. Let me just finish my point. You have to start from the position. You have to start from the position that the climate crisis is the lens through which you look at all your solutions.
I understand that. But one of the things we would end up using less of after we've got rid of these new licenses and run out of North Sea oil and gas is things like carbon fibre, which is used to make wind turbines. Solar panels are made from a silicon dioxide with the oxygen removed alongside coking coal. Every single microchip is made from fossil fuels. So what would happen in the event that fossil fuels use is stopped in the production of those technologies?
Can I just point out that the oil in the North Sea is not brought into the UK. Almost all of it is sold overseas.
Yes, but we also, that would be a good argument to say there could be climate benefits of having that oil and gas nearer home, so we stop importing it. But put that to one side. These technologies that are going to drive the transition to net zero, wind turbines, solar panels, microchips, all require fossil fuels to make them.
Yes, they do.
So what happens in the event that we have no more fossil fuels with which to make those things?
We husband our resources such that we can make these changes. And if we can't
What resources?
Hang on. Let's go back to the top here. The key point is the International Energy Agency, who are an advisory body to the oil and gas industry, have said no new oil and gas licenses should be issued. The UN has said it. The IPCC have said it, the organisation that looks at climate change. Changes. They've all said the same thing. We have to look at the decisions we make through the lens of the climate crisis, because it doesn't matter. You might say we can't do these things, but we will not have a livable world. So we have to make these changes. We have to make these changes such that when we make them, we live with the consequences and the consequences of the...
But I just want to know, Graham, that someone has thought through the consequences, that you at Just Stop Oil have thought through the consequences of getting what you're asking for and in getting what you're asking for, stopping tens of thousands of people who are going about their daily business. And when confronted with the reality that the technology required to help our transition to 2050, to get us there, whether it's through wind or through solar, requires fossil fuels, what replaces that?
Look, the first thing we have to do, it's a journey, isn't it? And the one thing you can say about the oil and gas industry, because as I pointed out, I've worked there, is the oil and gas industry is about money. Now, that's absolutely, I mean, I'm sure you'll agree with that. Their business depends upon shareholder value. And that's all about money. If you look at where they're trying to go, they are going to continue to push oil and gas until the very bitter end. And that's what they said. They want to be in oil and gas post-2050. We have to make these changes now. And the primary changes we have to make are no oil and gas licenses, and we have to reduce our demand. Demand reduction is a key part of the solution.
I understand, but we're going to need to heat homes and we're going to need some energy. And if we're making a transition to renewables, much cheaper, through wind or through solar, do you agree we are going to need oil and gas, and in some circumstances, coke? We are going to need those things to make the equipment that is going to get us into a much better place when it comes to climate change.
I'm going to say that we do not need, if you look at it from a global perspective, the oil and gas that's available now, without new projects, will meet the requirements. So no new oil and gas projects in the UK is part of that process, looking at a global level, is part of that process of making a sensible transition.
Okay. But so if we have no new licenses in the UK, we have no availability of those fossil fuels to make this stuff, we're going to outsource it, aren't we? We're going to buy it in the solar panels case, we're going to buy it from China. Are you happy with that consequence?
We're doing that already, aren't we?
Yes, but are you happy in making that more of the reality? That is going to be the way that we make these things because we haven't got the resources to do it ourselves because we've agreed to no new licenses.
We already don't use the oil from the North Sea. The oil in the North Sea is sold abroad. We already import almost all our oil from overseas. So it's not about oil, is it?
Rob West, the founder of the research consultancy...
Oil, is it?
Sorry?
It's not about oil.
Well, there is no doubt that oil is used in the manufacturing of these technologies, right?
Oil in the North Sea is sold overseas. The oil companies who have the licenses in the North Sea sell almost all the oil overseas. We do not bring it into this country. About 80% of it is sold overseas.
But carbon emission knows no borders. So even if we were to have no licenses here, no new licenses, we would still need that technology, which would be made through fossil fuels somewhere else in the world.
Tom, it's simple enough. Once you stop new oil and gas licenses, which the International Energy Agency has called for, all those other bodies I've mentioned have called for, then you use that available resource. And of course there'll be sharing around the world to some extent. That's absolutely inevitable. But what you have to do is make that decision.
Fine, but let's agree, that we are going to need oil and gas, fossil fuels, between now and 2050 and possibly after 2050 as well.
There are some areas where... There are three key areas where it's difficult. And you mentioned one of them, that's the chemical industry. And at the moment, the cement industry is one, and there are a couple, and there's another one, the fertilizer industry. So there's those three, which are difficult. And those three, if you look, for example, at the absolute zero scenario from UK Fires, which is a big university cooperative corporation, you will see that those are the three difficult areas. But they are a small fraction overall. And by addressing the key areas, we can massively reduce our carbon emissions. And that is the key requirement.
Right. I'm going to come to some calls in a moment, Graham, but I just want to leave you with this finally. A man called Rob West, who's founder of the research consultancy for energy technologies, Thunder Said Energy, says this: unless you've looked at every single industry and worked out how to produce what it produces without any fossil fuel inputs, it may be premature to eradicate all fossil fuels. Do you agree?
No, because...
No. So have you looked at every single industry to work out how to produce what it produces?
By starting somewhere, you have to start somewhere, don't you? If you look at the Treasury is driven by one set of values about how you run economies. The unit within the Treasury, which looks at the lens of climate change, looks at how we address climate change, is tiny. You have to start there. And if you don't start, you won't achieve it. Because the problem with the oil and gas industry is it slows down change. Because as you've said, We have all these technologies which run on it. And until we're prepared to move away from them, we will continue to be addicted to them. We have to make those changes.
Graham Buss, you are spokesperson for Just Stop Oil. Your calls to come, 0345 6060 973. Tom Swarbrick on LBC 419.
LBC Travel, I'm Dave Goff. There are long delays on the M11 northbound. One lane is closed between junction 5 for Loughton and junction 6 at the M25 because of an accident. It's slow on the M25 anti-clockwise. There's a lane closed at junction 7 for the M23 because a van has broken down. It's heavy on the A1M northbound. 2 lanes are blocked between junction 4 for Welwyn Garden City and junction 6 for Welwyn. That's because of an accident. The A21 Tunbridge bypass southbound is closed from the Vauxhall roundabout in Tunbridge to the North Farm roundabout in Tunbridge Wells. That's because of a serious accident, so there are queues. There are delays in Lambeth. The A23 Kennington Road is closed both ways at Chester Way because of an accident. And on the Underground, there's no Piccadilly line between Rayners Lane and Uxbridge.
This is LBC.
This is
Tom Swarbrick, 0345 6060 973. LBC.
I'm Julius.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC with Tom Swarbrick.
4:23 is the time. They are the protest movement of the moment. Just Stop Oil are joining us for an hour. Their spokesperson is Graham Buss, who we're delighted to have on the programme. Thanks again for being there, Graham. Loads of people want to come on and ask you questions or give their thoughts, so let's go to it right now. Peter's in East Finchley. Hi, Peter.
Oh, good afternoon to you. I've never heard such a load of claptrap from anybody. Have you ever been to a dialysis unit in hospital?
Are you asking me, or are you asking
Yes.
Graham, Peter? Me?
No, I'm asking you because I'll get a sensible answer from you. If you've ever been into a dialysis unit, you'll see the huge amount of plastic that's being used for the patients. If you've ever had an injection, they're using plastic. If there is virtually no medical procedure now that doesn't rely on plastic. If that gentleman's really concerned about saving the world from hydrocarbons, he should actually boycott Lego because they produce a huge amount of useless plastic.
What's your point, Peter? Because actually your point is the world is too reliant on plastics, which I think is part of Just Stop Oil's point.
No, there is no alternative. There is no alternative. You cannot make plastic syringes from renewable energy.
Right, let's put that to Graham. Graham, is there an alternative?
There are difficult areas to find solutions for. Interestingly, the NHS, of course, recognises their complete reliance on plastic and are trying to do something about it. But it is a difficult question. And I think this is one of the reasons why you have to start reducing the demand for fossil fuels in other areas, because then you can husband the available resource without going over the limits of what we can afford to put into our atmosphere. We're already very, very close to 1.5, considered to be a very dangerous point by the IPCC. We cannot continue to put all this carbon dioxide into the air. We cannot continue to use all this oil.
But I think people agree with you, Graham. I think
Then my point's very simple. We stop using it for less urgent things and we use it for those things for which there is an urgent requirement. That way we can reduce our demand and at the same time we can look for alternatives.
But I think I agree with you. But I would like some reality injected, if that's the right word to use, into this debate, particularly coming from Just Stop Oil, if I may be so bold as to suggest that they're talking about a world that is divorced from the reality of the fact that we are going to need fossil fuels for quite some time to come, including possibly past 2050.
You need to look at the scenarios, don't you? There's a number of scenarios. There's the government's net zero scenario, and there's another scenario called the absolute zero scenario. And what these scenarios show is what you have to do in order to stay under 1.5. Probably already too late, but let's say that we're doing the very best that we can. And one of the things you have to do within that scenario is stop a lot of fossil fuel consumption. And the primary fossil fuel consumptions that you have to stop are not those for which, as the caller just called in, we have the provide the urgent requirements for the NHS. So the NHS would be a protected industry until such time as alternatives are provided. But I can be absolutely certain that if there was an urgent requirement because resources were declining, we would find those solutions.
Sure.
One of the reasons why we don't is because oil is so cheap and so abundant. Not cheap at the moment, of course, but it's certainly very abundant.
All right. Peter, thank you for your question. Dawn's in Alton in Hampshire. Hi, Dawn.
Hi.
Fire away.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I can appreciate everyone's got their opinions, but sometimes I wonder, half these people on the motorways, do they actually contribute to society? You know, are most of them sort of on benefit? Because if they're spending all their days demonstrating on bridges, I'd like to know what they do on their days off. Aren't they better off, you know, going around the local villages and towns and seeing if, like, the little old lady's roof needs helping with her insulation and things like that, and doing things on the ground level rather than holding up everyone else who's trying to work?
Graham, are some of your protesters paid?
As far as I'm aware, none of them paid in Just Stop Oil. We are a broad coalition of people. So we have doctors, we have nurses, we have teachers, we have people like me who retired from the oil industry. There are an awful lot of students as well, a lot of young people still at university taking time out. Some people are taking time out of their degrees so that they can do this. It's a very wide range of people. Other people as well from the oil industry are involved in Just Stop Oil. So it's simply not true to say that, well, I think woman's observations were simply ridiculous.
Obvious. I'm not dismissing all of you, obviously, but I do find a lot of the time, half the people who join on this bandwagon, they do another one, and I'm for all the environment without a fail. But what irritates me is, shouldn't you be on to the government about China and the big countries? Because we can do all our bit in the UK, but at the end of the day, the whole, we're just one little piece of the puzzle, and we can't solve everybody's problems. And I think, we need to get real, really. We need to start on the ground. Think about people in your communities rather than holding up the motorways. I just find it, we're all great talkers. We're all quite good at that. We all do it. It's just hard.
Graham?
On acting in the community, the people I know, since I left the oil industry and joined the climate activism, and since I've joined this sort of movement, I have met more people who do things in the community than I ever met before. The people I know now are really kind, caring, considerate people.
I'm sure they are. But Dawn's point is she is broadly supportive of what you're asking for. She gets that there is an emergency here and that we need to do a lot. But the methods by which you're doing it is putting people like Dawn and I would suggest quite a lot of others off you.
I don't think that's what she was asking. She was saying, are we doing other things too? And I'm saying, yes, we are. Almost everybody I know has some other role.
Well, let's ask Dawn. Dawn, were you being put off by what Just Stop Oil are doing?
I just find that nowadays, with all the media and everything else, I just feel on the ground level there's a lot more I feel there's a lot more. We just need to do more on the ground level. And like I say, the UK can only do so much. And I'm sick to death of everyone slamming the UK. At the end of the day, we are so lucky we got free speech. You turn around in the world today, why don't you go to China and do something, go global? We need to hit the big guys. I bet most of you have got things brought in China, and I know. Do you know what I mean? We need to hit people where it hurts.
And therefore, perhaps chastising Britain's attempts on this is unfair. Graham?
All countries in the world, other than possibly a very small number of small island states, are not taking adequate action. I mean, that is absolutely clear, isn't it? And that's why Antonio Guterres at COP27 said that we're on the road to climate hell and that we still have our foot down on the accelerator.
Even that rhetoric, I want to come on to rhetoric in a minute. Graham. But even that rhetoric, I just find it ignores a bigger picture here. The last year that Britain had lower carbon emissions per capita than this year was 1857.
Yes.
That's remarkable. We are now emitting less carbon per capita than we did when we only had horses and carts.
Well, yes, of course, it was all coal then, wasn't it? And it was very inefficient too. No, that's what you're saying is true. But if you look at there was a very interesting in the Lancet on this issue. If you look at the cumulative emissions, rather than looking at the emissions per year now, you have to look at our cumulative emissions. Our cumulative emissions and the wealth that the OECD countries, the rich countries have, gives us a greater responsibility to act. Now, and also I live in this country, and so this is the country where I act. In other countries where people have the freedom to do that, they act too, all over Europe, for example. Now, if you look at China, let's just go quickly back to China. It's a complete red herring, this, isn't it? Because for a start, their emissions per capita are about the same as ours. Now, the reason why it's a big number is it's a big country. Come on, let's be a little more sensible about this. But one of the at the last COP, China agreed to some informal, in other words, non-legally binding commitments, and they and India are the reason why, if they are enacted, which at the moment it looks not very clear, but if they're enacted, they're the reason why we'll be at +2. Because if you take them out, we're at +2.7 degrees. And at the moment, we're 1.3 or something.
All right. Well, listen, Graham, we're going to come back to that in just a few moments. There are loads of people trying to ring in, and we're already running late. This hour is going to be eaten up very quickly. Graham Buss, you're a spokesperson for Just Stop Oil. More in a moment. 4:33 news headlines. Tim Humphrey.
The Prime Minister of Pakistan has made an emotional appeal to world leaders at the COP27 summit in Egypt. Devastating floods over the summer killed 1,000 people and caused damage estimated at $30 billion. The M25 has fully reopened following another morning of disruption from protesters. Just Stop Oil stopped traffic at a number of locations on the UK's busiest motorway. 16 people have been arrested. It's reported Sir Gavin Williamson has been referred to the parliamentary watchdog over bullying accusations. The former Education Secretary has strongly rejected the claims. And the weather, eastern and northeastern areas, mainly dry tonight. Some showers in central parts, heavier rain on southern and western coasts, and a low of 5 degrees.
LBC. Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Any of you furious with me for saying COP should be done via video link? Ed in Hereford, what do you say, Ed?
God, you're talking rubbish this morning.
Am I?
If you're worried about immigrants, then we've got to tackle climate. You ain't seen nothing yet.
40,000
sort out Putin. It's a fraction of the number of flights that take place every day. There probably aren't enough people there. A lot of important people haven't gone along. There isn't a more important issue on the planet at the present time.
You don't worry about Putin using nuclear weapons in Ukraine?
I think China's already told him he can't.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC.
Hello, Super.
Tom Swarbrick. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. This is LBC.
Just Stop Oil is with us for an hour in the form of their spokesperson Graham Buss, and Alex in Inverness has a question. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Tom. Graham, a question for yourself. Can I ask you when your moral compass kicked in? You were happy to earn a crust from the oil industry for many a year. No doubt you'll probably received a good package. So when did your moral compass kick in? You're showing an interest in the Let's Stop Oil campaign.
Graham.
So when I first joined Shell, I particularly wanted to work in the alternative energies business within Shell, which was a very small business at the time. And Shell was talking about transitioning out of oil. They didn't use that language, but transitioning out of oil. And I can tell you, when I joined Shell, they were talking like that. And when they left Shell, they were still talking about the transition. They started as an oil company talking about a transition, and when I left, they were an oil company talking about a transition. Over my career, I worked within the Shell renewable sector, developing new technologies. I was a principal scientist there, looking at technologies. Virtually nothing was ever implemented. And the reason it wasn't implemented was because of the profitability of the industries that they were looking at moving into. They are an oil company. And I think, in some ways, I deeply regret that I didn't leave earlier. But if you ask, when did I become really concerned about this? It was in the late 90s.
Well, Arthur asks a similar question. How long did you work for the oil industry, and did you only realise the damage they were doing after you started drawing your pension?
No. When I was working for Shell, I worked on renewable technologies. I worked with the Department of Energy and Climate Change on various technical programs with them to do with renewable technologies. I thought I could make a difference. That's why I was there. And what I found out was that I was not making a difference.
And it took you 23 years?
Well, the first half of my career was spent in the conventional industry. And I have to say, I knew it was going on. I wanted to work in the renewable sector within the Shell. And when I did join that sector, I spent the rest of my career looking at renewable technologies. So I tried to make a difference. And I have to say, I didn't succeed.
Alex, thank you for your question. Can I ask you about some of the language that we are hearing being used by both your protesters and some of the people involved with the group, the language that they have no future and we are doomed, what have you. I'm going to play you this from your founder, Roger Hallam. I'm going to give a warning before I play it because it's a bit grim. This is the Just Stop Oil founder, Roger Hallam, who said that women would be raped on their kitchen tables if the climate crisis tipped over.
The other thing about social collapse is the complete loss of material security, or law and order, as you might say. So what will happen is episodes where a gang of young men come into your house, they take your girlfriend, they take your mother, they put her onto the table and they gang rape her in front of you. And then after that, they take a hot stick and they poke out your eyes and they blind you. That's the reality of the annihilation project that you face.
I put it to you, Graham, that from your founder, that is the most grotesque, disgusting, evidence-free scaremongering. What say you?
It's not the language of Just Stop Oil.
So you disagree with it?
In wars, horrible, horrible things happen. And we will see, because of the climate crisis, the climate catastrophe, we will see more wars. But I certainly wouldn't use that language.
So you do disagree with it?
I disagree with his language, yes.
Kim's a new caller in Cambridge. Hi, Kim.
Hi.
Far away.
Hiya. So I am actually quite an angry person. I have not been fortunate enough to come from a privileged background. I've had to work my whole entire life. I have done jobs that have helped the public, and I have been hindered by people who feel like they're helping the public. But in fact, you're increasing my cost of getting into work. You're stopping emergency services from being able to assist, from assisting those people who you feel like you're helping. I just want to know the reason behind it. I want to know the reason why you think it's okay to stop the motorways dressed in plastics, i.e. your visors or your high visors that are from China, which is the very message that you're trying to go against. It's complete hypocrisy.
Graham.
For a start, I don't come from a privileged background. I was fortunate to be educated when I got a grant. I'm very fortunate indeed. But I certainly don't come from a privileged background, but I'm not going to go into my background now. So why are we doing this? Well, I think we've already explained why we're doing this.
No, Kim understands why. It's just, why target people like Kim, who is just trying to get on with her day, do the best that she can, and for a lot of people agree with the broad thrust of needing to make big changes to deal with climate change?
I think what we're doing is awful. Yes, I do.
The protests?
Yeah, it's awful. It's unacceptable.
So why are you doing it?
I regret that we have to do it.
Well, if you've not requested a meeting... Hang on a sec. You haven't requested a meeting with an authority that grants the licences for new oil and gas fields. The government isn't... Hang on a sec. No, Graham. The government isn't listening to you. For whatever reason, the government isn't listening to you. We've talked about the consequences of what would happen if what you asked for became real. But what you're getting is attention. No doubt you're getting attention. And one of the things that I hear from people such as your good self is, where's the conversation about what we can do around climate change? Would you agree that that is one of the things that is good that has come out of this? People are talking to you guys and hearing you guys more often.
That's positive. We did request a meeting with BEIS, with Business, Energy and Industry Strategy, which they rejected.
Right. But in the absence of getting the government to listen, if you were offered regular, mass, mainstream audience to talk to hear from in much the same fashion as this, would you call off those protests? Would you stop doing these awful protests?
We will stop when the government agrees no new oil and gas licenses and consents in the UK.
But you are turning the public against you as you're doing this.
No, we're not. But actually, it's not a beauty contest. We're not doing this necessarily to be popular, but actually, recent survey by a business called Omnisys, who do these sorts of interviews, that they said that 2 out of every 3 people in their survey agreed with non-violent civil resistance when it's related to the climate crisis.
So why can't you get what you want?
The government isn't acting. So because the government's not doing enough, we are continuing to put pressure on them.
But if the government isn't going to move, and it isn't going to move because of your protests, would you agree to stopping those protests in order to keep getting your message out? Your message is the thing that you want the government to hear, not if it can come without the queues on the motorways and stopping people like Kim. That's got to be better for everyone, hasn't it?
The alternatives haven't worked. So this is our last...
Have you given it a go? Have you given the alternatives a go?
Of course we have. 30, 40 years of climate activism have seen people attempting to make changes. That has not worked.
And yet we are seeing changes. We are seeing changes.
The changes are entirely insignificant compared to the level of change that we require to see. We are still... Look, you said you were going to talk about rhetoric. Road to climate hell. Top 20 oil producers in the world are going to invest $1 trillion by 2030 in new oil and gas projects. And we know that we should have no new oil and gas projects. That is your foot on the accelerator, isn't it? That's the road to climate hell.
But I thought we just agreed, Graham, that we are going to need some oil and gas in 2030 and possibly in 2050 to make this transition.
Hang on. The other half of what I said was we husband the available resource we have now and we reduce the demand in areas where we can do so. And that's what we have to do.
More calls to come. 4:47.
LBC Travel, I'm Dave Goff. It's slow on the M25. One lane is closed in both directions between junction 24 for Potters Bar and junction 25 for Enfield because of emergency repairs. There are queues on the A1M northbound. 2 lanes are blocked after junction 6 for Welling. That's because of an accident. The A21 Tunbridge Bypass southbound stays closed from the A26 to the North Farm roundabout in Tunbridge Wells. That's because of a serious accident, so there are queues. There are delays in Lambeth. The A23 Kennington Road is closed both ways between Chester Way and Black Prince Road. That's because of an accident. On the tube, there's no Piccadilly line between Rayners Lane and Uxbridge because of leaves on the line, and on the train, South Eastern are running buses between Maidstone West and Strood. That's because of a landslip.
This is LBC. Tom Swarbrick, 0345 6060 973. This is LBC. Swarbrick. Tweet at LBC.
Here you are, Graham. You're going to like this. Here's Paul on 84850. Tom, please tell your Just Stop Oil guest he's doing a great job. Keep it up, says Paul in the Cotswolds. Here's Donald. Graham is sound. He speaks sense very eloquently. The people calling in to put him down have no real point other than a personal attack on a guy making a valid one. Good on you, Graham, says Donald. Becky's in Bromley. Becky.
Hello, good evening. Nice to be on the show.
Welcome. Far away.
Hello. Right, so my question is really, how are you going to deal with the constant negative barrage that you get through the media? How are you going to turn it round? I mean, I'm fully in support of you, and I think you're doing a brilliant job. And I think that all of the people that are part of your cause obviously have feel very, very compelled to do something about an enormous crisis that unfortunately governments around the world, including our government, haven't done anything about. But how are you going to take on board this constant barrage of negativity?
Graham?
One thing is that we ask people such as you, Tom, to support our actions and support, even if you can't support our actions, you could support our objectives. And those are that we often make this point when we are engaged in interviews. We ask the interviewer what they're doing. We have to live with the fact that a lot of the interviews that we do are with interviewers who don't support us.
Well, you've got no idea whether I support you or not.
And indeed, I haven't criticised you on that issue. But that would be, I might ask you what.
Well, you've described your own protests as awful.
Yeah, they are.
So I would agree with you. If you at Just Stop Oil believe what your protests are awful, I'm going to go with that. I think your protests are awful.
And I deeply regret that we have to do it, but you have to ask us, why are we doing it?
And I've asked you why you're doing it, because you want to get rid of all new oil and gas licences. And I've talked to you, we've gone round the houses about the consequences of doing that. And as I see it, to be honest with you, Graham, I don't really see yet that Just Stop Oil have genuinely thought through the consequences of what they're asking. You talk about husbanding the resources to create the carbon fibre necessary to build things like wind turbines or solar panels. And I'm not sure, I don't know what that means.
We have a finite resource of oil and gas left. We decide to have no new oil and gas, yeah? So that means that we stop doing some things and we use what we've got for essential activities.
Like building wind turbines.
You've got a finite amount of money in your bank account, so you don't fly halfway around the world to go skiing. You spend it on something sensible, like buying food for your children. That's what we're talking about. That's what husbanding your resources means, and that's what we're saying we have to do.
But you say that there's only 8 years left of the current amount of oil and gas in reserve. That's why new licences have been offered to try and get more of that. And that's because we're going to need more of it to create the products that we need actually to make the transition. And it's that last bit that I'm not sure I hear you agreeing with. And I'm not sure why you don't agree with that.
Well, fundamentally, we're going around the houses a bit here, aren't we? I've made this point before. Fundamentally, you have to start from the position that all new oil and gas is not going to be part of our solution, because it's going to destroy everything considered to be important. So if we start from that position, that we look at everything through that lens of no new oil and gas, then you have to say, well, then what do we do with the oil and gas we've got? So, and that means that there are activities that we stop doing, like we stop using our cars so much, we have much more public transport, we reduce the size of our vehicles.
But you said we've only got 8 years left, and I'm wondering what happens after those 8 years in the building of wind turbines or solar panels, or cars, or anything else that requires hydrochemicals.
So if we reduce our consumption very, very dramatically, we can make that last much longer. And of course, we are talking about a global supply based on current exploited resources. And that will see us through a sensible transition. And even if it's not enough, we will have to do it, because the consequences of not doing it are so profoundly frightening.
So how much more oil and gas could be left to husband if demand is dropped off? How much can we eke this out for? How much longer?
Easily see us through a sensible transition. Easily.
What does that mean?
IPCC, we have to halve global emissions by the end of this decade. That's going to be incredibly hard. So we have to do our bit for that. We have to halve our total emissions, not just the power sector, by the end of the decade. That's what we should be aiming for. And our government has not committed to that.
Final word from Gary in Windsor. Gary.
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me on your show. So I live in Windsor and I have a meeting in Portsmouth tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. And what I want to know from Just Stop Oil is, how do I do that without a car? I just would like to hear their practical view on the future. So the billions of journeys that take place every day around the world, where people like me, who are trying to make a living, have to use their cars. What's their alternative?
Yeah, okay. So we're calling for a number of changes. One is a much larger, better, cheaper public transport system. That's the first thing, isn't it? The other thing you do, if we're going to diminish the amount of oil and gas we use, while we make that transition to these alternatives, is you make you reduce the speed limits, for example. You have more online meetings. And I don't know what this chap is, where he lives, but could he get the train? There are other alternatives. And if you have to make those changes, you will find a way to make them work. The reason why you're in the problem you're in now is because you're presuming that you have the use of a car. If you realise the consequences of that and made those changes, you would find alternative ways of doing your business.
Do you use a car?
Who? Me?
Yeah.
Almost entirely never now.
So you do?
Well, I own a car, but I haven't driven it now for well over 6 weeks, I think. So I don't use. No, I have a car, but I don't use it.
You haven't used it in the last 6 weeks, but you're telling people like Gary to find other alternatives.
I'm saying that, look, even the government's net zero strategy says we have to reduce demand.
I agree.
But they are not implementing that. They are relying on the general public to do it. And I'm saying that the only way you can make that happen is by improving alternatives. And those alternatives will give Gary an alternative option.
Gary, I appreciate the call. Great to speak to you. Graham, thank you so much for coming on. I'd like to do this again at some stage, hopefully once the protests have passed and we out of this cycle of protests. But it'd be good to have you on again because it's been really interesting. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Graham Buss, you are a spokesperson for Just Stop Oil. You're listening to Tom Swarbrick on LBC. It's 5 o'clock. These are the headlines.
And this all happened despite our very low carbon footprints.
Leaders of countries worst affected by climate change appeal for action as COP27 continues in Egypt.
There's obviously good atmospherics. We saw that at Sharm el-Sheikh at the COP conference between Rishi Sunak and President Macron.
Has a deal been reached with France to tackle channel crossings? We'll get the details.
We will stop the disruption, Mr. Sunak, when you say you are going to stop new oil and gas.
The M25 reopens after Just Stop Oil caused havoc on the UK's busiest motorway. And
this is the year we're going to take back the House, we're going to take back the Senate, and we're going to take back America.
Donald Trump continues to drop hints of a second run as president as a voting in the crucial US midterm elections begins.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play.